The sky burned orange and red as the strange object tore through the clouds above the Alaskan wilderness. Jack Miller stopped in his tracks, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air as he watched the fiery trail cut across the evening sky. In his 15 years as a wilderness guide, he had never seen anything like it. "That's no meteor," he muttered to himself, adjusting the heavy pack on his shoulders. Whatever it was, it had crashed somewhere in the valley ahead, maybe 5 miles from his position. Jack hadn't planned on company during his solo expedition, but curiosity got the better of him. A former Marine with 3 tours of duty behind him, he had come to Alaska seeking peace and solitude. Now he found himself hiking toward a potential crash site as darkness began to fall. The journey took him 2 hours, following the faint glow that pulsed beyond the ridge. When Jack finally reached the impact site, he found a smoking crater about 30 feet wide. In the center sat what looked like a metallic egg, its surface gleaming with strange symbols that seemed to shift and change as he approached. "Definitely not one of ours," Jack said, reaching for his flashlight. The object was clearly artificial, maybe 15 feet long and half as wide. No government on Earth had technology like this. A section of the craft suddenly slid open with a soft hiss. Jack dropped to one knee, instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Steam poured from the opening, and in the beam of his flashlight, he could make out movement inside. "Hello," he called out, immediately feeling foolish. Whatever was in there, it probably didn't speak English. A slender hand emerged from the opening, its skin a pale blue with a slight shimmer that caught the light. Jack inched closer, his heart pounding against his ribs. The hand belonged to a woman, at least something that looked very much like a woman. She dragged herself halfway out of the craft before collapsing. Jack rushed forward, medical training kicking in. The being before him was humanoid, but clearly not human. Her skin had an iridescent quality, changing colors slightly as she breathed. Her features were delicate, almost ethereal, with large, almond-shaped eyes that remained closed. A dark liquid that might have been blood seeped from a wound on her side. "Hang on," Jack said, kneeling beside her. "I'm going to help you." The alien's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises that swirled with colors Jack had never seen before. She spoke, her voice musical, but the words incomprehensible. When she tried to move, she winced in pain. Jack made a quick assessment. The wound wasn't immediately life-threatening, but she needed treatment. The nearest town was a 4-day hike away, and there was no cell service this deep in the wilderness. "Looks like we're stuck with each other for now," Jack said, pulling medical supplies from his pack. He cleaned and bandaged the wound as best he could, talking softly the whole time. The alien watched him with those swirling eyes, sometimes responding in her own language as if they were having a conversation. Night fell fully as Jack set up camp near the crash site. He built a fire and created a makeshift shelter, moving the alien carefully to keep her warm. She had drifted in and out of consciousness, but her breathing seemed stable. As Jack settled in for the night, the alien suddenly gripped his arm. She placed her other hand on her chest and said something that sounded like Zora. "Your name is Zora?" Jack asked, pointing to her. She nodded slightly, then pointed at him with a questioning look. "Jack," he replied, touching his own chest. "Jack Miller." Zora repeated his name, the sound strange on her tongue. Then she drifted off to sleep, her hand still on his arm. Jack looked up at the stars, wondering what he had gotten himself into. Somewhere up there, someone was probably looking for her. He had no idea who she was, or where she came from. But one thing was certain. His peaceful solo expedition had just become something much more complicated. Jack woke at dawn to the sound of something humming overhead. He peeked out from the shelter and saw 3 disc-shaped objects moving slowly across the sky. They gleamed in the morning light, clearly searching for something or someone. Zara stirred beside him, her eyes opening wide at the sound. She grabbed Jack's arm and whispered something urgent in her language, her expression fearful. "They're looking for you, aren't they?" Jack asked, even though she couldn't understand him. Her frantic nodding told him all he needed to know. Jack made a quick decision. If those ships found them, he'd lose any control over the situation. He needed to get Zara to safety before deciding what to do next. "We have to move," he said, packing up their small camp. Zara tried to stand but stumbled, her wound clearly still painful. Jack supported her weight, surprised at how light she felt despite being nearly as tall as him. They headed deeper into the forest, away from the crash site. Jack chose a path that would be difficult to track, crossing streams and walking on rocky ground when possible. He'd learned these techniques both as a Marine and as a wilderness guide. Now they might save both their lives. "We need to cover about 15 miles today," Jack said, knowing she couldn't understand the words but might grasp his tone. "There's a hunter's cabin I know about. We can rest there." Zara watched him closely, sometimes mimicking his words under her breath. Jack noticed she seemed to be studying his mouth as he spoke, as if trying to learn his language. By midday, the disc-shaped ships returned, flying lower this time. Jack and Zara hid under a rocky overhang as one passed directly overhead. The ship emitted a blue light that swept the forest floor. "Some kind of scanner," Jack muttered. He pulled out his emergency blanket, a thin sheet of reflective material meant to retain body heat. On a hunch, he wrapped it around both of them. The blue light passed over their hiding spot twice, but moved on without pausing. When the ship disappeared, Zara touched the blanket and looked at Jack with new respect. She said something in her language, her tone clearly admiring. "Just a trick," Jack said with a shrug. "Their technology is probably confused by the reflection." They continued their journey through the afternoon. Zara grew stronger with each hour, though she still needed help on difficult terrain. By evening, dark clouds gathered overhead, and a light snow began to fall. Jack spotted the cabin just as the snowfall intensified. It was an old trapper's shelter, abandoned years ago, but still solid. He led Zara inside and barred the door behind them. The cabin was simple. One room with a wood stove, a rough table, and a bed frame with a musty mattress. Jack quickly lit a fire in the stove, grateful for the dry wood left by previous visitors. Zara explored the cabin with obvious curiosity, touching the wooden walls and examining the few items left on the shelves. She pointed to various objects, and Jack named them for her. Cup, book, lantern, chair. She repeated each word, her pronunciation improving with each attempt. When Jack handed her a cup of hot water, she smiled for the first time since he'd found her. That night, they sat by the stove's warmth while snow piled up outside. Jack checked Zara's wound and found it healing remarkably fast. Whatever species she was, they clearly recovered quicker than humans. As they settled in for the night, Zara pointed to the sky and made a sweeping gesture with her hand, then pointed to herself. "You're from up there," Jack said, nodding. "But who are you? And why are those ships hunting you?" Zara seemed to understand his questions. She sat up straighter and placed her hand on her chest. "Zara," she said. Then she made a gesture like placing a crown on her head. Jack stared at her, realization dawning. "You're some kind of royalty," he said slowly. "A princess. A queen." Zara nodded at the last word, recognizing it somehow. "Queen," she repeated carefully. Jack sighed heavily and looked at the snow falling outside. He'd managed to rescue, or kidnap, an alien queen, and somewhere out there, someone very powerful was looking for her. Jack woke to find Zara sitting by the window, watching the snowfall. 3 days had passed since they reached the cabin. The storm outside had grown worse, trapping them inside, but also hiding them from the searching ships. "Morning," Jack said, stretching. "Hungry?" Zara turned to him and smiled. "Morning. Yes. Hungry." Jack paused, surprised by her clear pronunciation. "You're learning fast." "Fast learning." "Yes." She tapped her head. "Mind. Different." Each day, Zara had picked up more words, By now, she could understand basic phrases and respond in simple sentences. Jack had never seen anyone learn a language so quickly. As Jack prepared a simple breakfast from his supplies, Zara joined him at the table. She pointed to various items, naming them one by one. Knife, spoon, water, food. That's right, Jack said. You're a quick study. Zara watched him carefully. Jack, why help Zara? The question caught him off guard. You were hurt. Where I come from, we help people who need it. Because, Queen? She asked. Jack shook his head. No, because you're a person. Queen or not, doesn't matter to me. Zara seemed confused by this. Not matter. On Earth, we believe all people deserve help, Jack explained, keeping his words simple. At least, that's what we're supposed to believe. Zara was quiet for a moment, considering this. Different. My world. Position is everything. As they ate, Zara's words became more fluid. Jack realized she wasn't just memorizing phrases, but actually understanding the language structure. Bad people want Zara dead, she said suddenly. Husband not no. Your husband? Jack asked. The king. Zara nodded. King Varric. Good man. But trusts wrong people. Through halting sentences and gestures, Zara explained that she had been on a diplomatic mission when her ship was attacked. The assassination attempt had been made to look like an accident. She had barely escaped in the emergency pod. Who wants you dead? Jack asked. Commander Drez, Zara said, her face darkening. Wants war. I want peace. Jack listened as Zora described a vast empire spanning multiple star systems. Her people, the Celestials, had ruled for thousands of years. Recently, some factions had pushed for expanding their territory through conquest rather than diplomacy. Drez says humans primitive, Zara said. Not worth talking to. Only conquering. And what do you think? Jack asked. Zara studied him for a long moment. Humans. Interesting. Different. You have less. She gestured around the simple cabin, but understand more. Jack laughed. I don't know about that. We have our share of problems. You helped me, Zara said simply. No reason. No reward. Just helped. They spent the rest of the day talking. Zara's command of English grew stronger by the hour. She asked questions about Earth, about human societies, about Jack's life. In turn, she told him about her world, about the Celestial Empire, about the delicate balance of power she maintained as queen. That night, as they sat by the fire, Zara said, Jack saved Zara's life. In my world, now you have royal debt. Jack waved his hand dismissively. No debt. It's what anyone would do. No, Zara said firmly. Not anyone. You special. Before Jack could respond, a bright light flashed outside, illuminating the cabin through the windows. The sudden beam cut through the snowstorm, focusing directly on them. Zara tensed. They found us. Jack moved quickly to the window. Through the swirling snow, he could make out the silhouette of a ship much larger than the search vessels they had seen before. Time to go, he said, grabbing his pack. There's a cellar under the cabin. Might buy us some time. Zara stood, her face set with determination. Jack, she said, her voice clear and strong. Whatever happens, you must know truth. I am not just queen. I am key to peace or war. If I die, my husband will burn your world in grief. Jack pulled up the trapdoor hidden under an old rug. He helped Zara down the wooden ladder into the dark cellar below. The space was small and dusty, with shelves of old canned goods lining one wall. Jack closed the trapdoor just as they heard a loud thump on the cabin's roof. Stay quiet, Jack whispered to Zara. Through the wooden boards above, they could hear heavy footsteps moving across the floor. The cellar was cold and damp. Jack pulled out his flashlight, but kept it off. Years of military training had taught him that darkness was sometimes the best defense. Above them, someone spoke in a language Jack didn't understand. Zara's body tensed beside him. She leaned close to his ear. "Commander Drez's soldiers," she whispered. "4 of them. Looking for heat signs." Jack nodded, understanding the danger. Any modern scanning technology would easily find them hiding below the floor. He had to think fast. The footsteps moved toward the trapdoor. They had only seconds. Jack noticed an old metal pipe running along the wall, likely part of the cabin's original plumbing system. He struck it hard with his hunting knife, creating a loud ringing sound. The noise echoed through the pipes, seeming to come from somewhere outside the cabin. The footsteps paused, then rushed toward the front door. Jack could hear the aliens running outside, following the sound. "Smart," Zara whispered. "Old trick," Jack replied. "But we don't have much time. They'll be back." Jack quietly opened his pack and pulled out a map. Using the faint light coming through the floorboards, he showed Zara their location. "We're here," he pointed. "There's a system of caves about 2 miles east. If we can reach them, we might have a better chance of hiding." Zara studied the map. "Their scanners struggle with dense rock," she agreed. They waited until the sounds outside faded, then carefully climbed out of the cellar. Jack peeked through the window. The snowstorm had eased, but darkness had fallen, which would help cover their escape. "Ready?" Jack asked. Zara nodded, her face determined. They slipped out the back door of the cabin and into the cold night. They moved quietly through the forest, Jack leading the way. Every sound made them freeze, a branch breaking, an animal moving in the underbrush. Twice they had to hide as flying drones passed overhead, their lights scanning the trees. "These aren't just regular soldiers," Zara explained as they pressed on. "These are Drez's personal guards, the elite hunters." Jack helped her over a fallen tree. "So why is this Commander Drez so determined to find you?" "Drez wants war with neighboring systems," Zara said. "I stand in the way. If I die, my husband will attack out of anger." Exactly what Drez wants. The sound of a ship's engines rumbled in the distance. Jack pulled Zara behind a large boulder as lights swept across the forest. "How did they find us so quickly?" Jack wondered aloud. Zara touched her side where her wound had been. "Tracker," she realized. "My royal blood. They can track my DNA signature." Jack thought quickly. The streams. Water might confuse the signal. They changed direction, moving toward a small river Jack knew was nearby. The water would be dangerously cold, but they had no choice. When they reached the riverbank, Jack checked Zara's face. "Can you handle this? It's going to be freezing." Zara smiled grimly. "Celestials handle cold better than humans. I worry for you." Before Jack could respond, a bright spotlight hit the trees just 50 yards behind them. Voices called out in an alien language. "No time to debate," Jack said. He grabbed Zora's hand, and they waded into the icy water. The shock of cold took Jack's breath away. They moved as quickly as they could downstream, staying close to the bank where the current was weaker. Behind them, the alien hunters reached the riverbank. Their lights swept over the water, but Jack and Zora had already rounded a bend in the river. "Caves ahead," Jack said through chattering teeth, pointing to a dark opening in the hillside. "Almost there." Zora squeezed his hand. "Jack, your skin. Too cold." Jack could barely feel his legs now, but he pushed forward, just a little further. As they dragged themselves out of the water and toward the cave entrance, the distant sound of pursuit grew louder. The hunters had figured out their plan. The cave was dark but dry. Jack's hands shook as he tried to light a small fire using twigs and branches they had gathered at the entrance. Zara watched him with concern. "You too cold," she said, touching his arm. His skin felt like ice. Jack nodded, his teeth chattering. "Hypothermia. Dangerous for humans." Zara looked around the cave, then reached into a hidden pocket in her clothing. She pulled out a small device about the size of a coin. It glowed with a soft blue light when she pressed it. "Forbidden to share technology," she said, but no choice now. The device warmed quickly in her hand. She passed it to Jack, who felt immediate relief as the warmth spread through his fingers and up his arm. "What is it?" he asked. "Heat cell. Military technology." She looked troubled. "Using it sends signal. Risky." Jack wanted to return it, but the warmth was too necessary. His wet clothes clung to him, and the cave air was freezing. "Thank you," he said simply. They huddled together near the back of the cave, listening for sounds of pursuit. After an hour, they began to relax slightly. The hunters seemed to have lost their trail. Zora used this quiet time to explain more about her situation. Her English was now fluent enough to tell her full story. "My husband, King Varric, is powerful but sometimes blind to deception," she said. "Commander Drez has been his friend since childhood. Varric trusts him completely." "But Drez wants war," Jack said. Zara nodded. "Our empire is peaceful now, but it wasn't always. Some believe we should conquer rather than cooperate. Drez leads this faction." She explained that she had discovered Drez's plans to stage attacks on their own colonies and blame it on neighboring systems. When she gathered evidence to show her husband, Drez's people attacked her ship. "Varric now thinks I was kidnapped by terrorists," she said sadly. "He does not know I am here with you." "We need to contact him," Jack said. "Let him know you're safe." Zara touched the heat cell in Jack's hand. "This can be modified. Might send message to loyal guards. If we—" A sudden explosion rocked the cave entrance, sending rocks and dust flying into the air. Jack pulled Zara behind a large boulder as armed figures appeared in the dust cloud. "Found us," Jack muttered. 3 alien soldiers entered the cave, their weapons drawn. They wore sleek armor that seemed to shift colors to match the surrounding rocks. Each had a helmet that covered their face completely. Jack looked around desperately for a weapon, finding only a heavy rock. It wouldn't be enough against their advanced technology. The soldiers spoke in their language, their voices harsh. They hadn't spotted Jack and Zara behind the boulder yet, but they were moving closer. Jack whispered to Zara, "Any weak points in their armor?" Zora pointed to the back of their necks. "Junction point. Sensors located there." Jack nodded and prepared to move. He would only get one chance. Just then, one of the soldiers looked down and noticed the heat cell on the ground where Jack had dropped it. He called to the others. Jack seized the moment. He sprang from behind the boulder and threw the rock hard at the nearest soldier's neck sensor. The alien dropped instantly as the systems in his suit failed. The other 2 soldiers turned, raising their weapons. Zara suddenly leaped forward, moving with surprising speed. She touched something on the fallen soldier's wrist, and his weapon activated. A blast of energy hit one of the standing soldiers. The last soldier fired at Jack, who dove to the side. The shot missed him but hit the cave wall, causing more rocks to fall. A large boulder struck the soldier from above. When the dust settled, all 3 hunters were down. Jack stared at Zora in amazement. "You fight well for a queen," he said. Zora looked at the fallen soldiers with sadness. "I was warrior before I was queen. These were my people once." She knelt beside the first soldier and removed his helmet. The face beneath was similar to hers, but male with the same iridescent skin. "We must hurry," she said, taking equipment from the soldiers. "Others will come." Jack helped her gather what they needed. "Where to now?" Zara held up a communication device she had taken from one of the soldiers. "We contact someone I trust. Only one person can stop this war now." "Who?" Jack asked. "King Varric himself," Zara said. "My husband must know the truth." 3 days later, Jack and Zara stood at the edge of a small town in northern Alaska. They had traveled through rough country, using the equipment taken from the alien soldiers to avoid detection. Now, clean clothes borrowed from a vacant hunting cabin made them look almost normal, except for Zara's unusual skin and eyes. "Remember, keep the hood up," Jack said. Zara nodded and pulled the hood of her jacket forward, shadowing her face. News reports had been playing on the radio in the cabin. The whole world now knew about the alien ships in orbit. Leaders from all nations were meeting with alien representatives at a military base just 50 miles from their location. "Your husband is there?" Jack asked. "Yes, I feel his presence," Zora said. "But Drez will be with him." They hitched a ride with a local truck driver who was too busy talking about the alien visitors to ask questions about his passengers. As they approached the military base, they saw the massive security presence: soldiers, tanks, aircraft. "How do we get in?" Jack wondered aloud. Zora pulled out the communication device she had taken from the fallen soldier. "This will help, but only to a point. Then we need luck." At a roadblock 2 miles from the base, they slipped away from the truck and moved through the forest that bordered the facility. Using the alien device, Zora was able to create gaps in the security sensors just long enough for them to pass. "Like turning off a camera for a few seconds," she explained to Jack. They reached the outer fence as dusk fell. Beyond it, they could see enormous spotlights illuminating something in the center of the base. A massive alien ship had landed in what was once a parade ground. "My husband's royal vessel," Zora whispered. As they watched, a group of humans in suits walked toward the ship, accompanied by alien guards in ceremonial armor. Among them was a tall, regal alien with a crown-like headpiece. "Varric," Zora said, her voice catching. Jack studied the alien king. Even at this distance, his authority was clear in how he moved and how others deferred to him. Beside him walked another alien, slightly shorter but with ornate armor. "Let me guess, Commander Drez," Jack said. Zora nodded grimly. "We must reach Varric before they go inside for negotiations. Once formal talks begin, we cannot interrupt." Jack looked at the heavy security between them and the ship. "Even with your device, we'll be spotted crossing that open ground." "Then we don't hide," Zora said simply. She stood up straight and removed her hood, letting her iridescent skin catch the fading sunlight. "We walk in the open." Before Jack could stop her, Zora stepped out from their hiding place and walked directly toward the nearest guard post. Jack cursed under his breath and followed her. The reaction was immediate. Alarms sounded. Soldiers raised weapons. Lights swung in their direction. Zora walked calmly forward, her hands raised. Jack kept pace beside her, his heart pounding but his face composed. A voice boomed over loudspeakers in English. "Halt immediately, or we will open fire." Zora called out in a clear, commanding voice. "I am Queen Zara of the Celestial Empire. I demand to see my husband." The soldiers looked at each other in confusion. One spoke urgently into a radio. Near the ship, the group of dignitaries had stopped. The alien king turned sharply toward the commotion. Even at a distance, Jack could see the shock in Varric's posture. The king began moving rapidly toward them, his guards struggling to keep up. Commander Drez grabbed the king's arm, pointing at Jack. Even without understanding the language, Jack could tell Drez was calling him a kidnapper or worse. Soldiers surrounded Jack and Zora, weapons trained on them. Jack kept his hands visible and his movements slow. Varric pushed through the soldiers, his eyes fixed on Zora. Behind him, Drez's face showed a mixture of shock and fury. "Husband," Zora said as Varric reached her. The king spoke in their language, his voice emotional. Zora replied calmly, then switched to English. "This human saved my life," she said, gesturing to Jack. "He protected me from those who truly wished me harm." Drez stepped forward, his hand moving to a weapon at his side. "My king, this is clearly a human trick. They have." "Be silent," Varric commanded in perfect English. He studied Jack with intense eyes. "You claim to have saved my queen." Jack met his gaze steadily. "I just helped someone who needed it. Didn't know she was a queen until later." Drez's hand tightened on his weapon. Jack saw what was coming before anyone else did. Jack lunged forward, tackling Varric to the ground just as Drez pulled his weapon and fired. The energy blast passed over them, hitting a security vehicle behind them. Soldiers shouted and raised their weapons. For a moment, chaos ruled. Zara's voice cut through the confusion. Drez is the traitor. He tried to kill your king. Drez fired again, this time at Zara. Jack rolled to his feet and grabbed a fallen soldier's helmet, throwing it with perfect aim. The helmet struck Drez's arm, causing his shot to miss. King Varric stood up, his face a mixture of shock and growing anger. "Seize Commander Drez," he ordered. Drez backed away, firing wildly to keep everyone at bay. "The humans have corrupted the Queen's mind," he shouted. "Can't you see their primitive deception?" Guards moved in from all sides. Drez, seeing he was trapped, pointed his weapon directly at Varric. "The Empire needs strength, not your weak diplomacy." Jack picked up a fallen metal rod and flung it like a spear. It struck Drez's hand, knocking the weapon away. Before Drez could recover, the royal guard swarmed him, forcing him to the ground. Silence fell over the scene. Varric looked from Drez to Jack, then to Zara. "My wife," he said softly. "I thought you were dead." Zara moved to his side. "Drez wanted war. He arranged the attack on my ship. This human found me and protected me when I was injured." Varric turned to Jack. "You saved my queen when you had no obligation to do so. My empire owes you a debt." Jack shrugged. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Varric said. "They would not. I have studied your species since arriving here. Many of your kind would have feared her or sought advantage." He looked at Zara. "Yet you found one who offered help without question." The human officials who had been watching in stunned silence finally approached. A woman in a military uniform stepped forward. "Your Majesty," she addressed Varric carefully. "Perhaps we could continue our discussions inside. This incident has raised many questions." Varric nodded. "Indeed. But first," he turned to Drez, who was now securely held by guards. "Take this traitor to the ship. He will face justice under our laws." As Drez was led away, he spat words at Jack. "You primitive fool. You have no idea what forces you're meddling with." Jack just smiled. Primitive doesn't mean stupid. The next few hours passed in a blur of explanations and negotiations. Jack found himself sitting at a table with world leaders and alien royalty, telling his story again and again. By dawn, agreements had been reached. Instead of invasion or conquest, Varric offered alliance and exchange of knowledge. Earth would join the galactic community gradually, with safeguards to protect human culture and independence. As the formal documents were being prepared, Zara found Jack outside, watching the sunrise. "You look tired," she said. "Been a long week," Jack replied with a smile. "Not every day you rescue an alien queen and help prevent an interstellar war." Zara laughed, the sound like music. "What will you do now?" "Varric wishes to honor you. He could give you wealth, technology, position." Jack looked out at the mountains in the distance. "Think I'll go back to my cabin. The quiet life suits me." Varric joined them, his regal bearing softened by genuine respect. "Earth has been accepted as a protected world in our alliance," he said. "But we need someone who understands both our ways. An ambassador of sorts." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You're not asking me, are you?" "Who better?" Varric said. "You have proven your worth not through technology or power, but through compassion and courage." "I'm just a wilderness guide," Jack protested. Zara touched his arm. "You are the human who saved a queen and changed the fate of worlds. My people have a saying, 'The quietest voice often speaks the greatest truth.'" Jack looked between them, then out at his world. A world that had just become part of something much larger. "I guess I could give it a try," he said finally. "But I'm keeping my cabin. Even an ambassador needs somewhere quiet to think." Varric smiled. "Agreed." As the sun rose fully over the horizon, the three stood together, king, queen, and the ordinary human who had proven that sometimes the most primitive response is the most noble, to help someone simply because they need it.